Hi, everyone. Welcome to GMAT Club. And today we're going to be talking about winner and loser MBA resumes. I'm so excited for you to be here. My name is Jen T with a Ringo, and I'm really excited to get to talk to you today about resumes. But before we get started, just want to jump in real quick to say, if you are interested in applying to MBA programs, whether that's this fall or next fall or in the future, you should definitely be joining us for the GMAT Club MBA Spotlight. And so the MBA Spotlight is going to be happening for June so it'll be June 11th and 12th. And so we'll have top MBA programs here having conversations with you. And it is a fantastic way to get to know more about each one of these schools, because I will tell you, from an MBA admissions consulting perspective, you want to get to know the schools more than just what's on the website. And so talking to these admissions professionals is definitely the way to be able to do that. So again, join us June 11th and 12th here for the MBA Spotlight. All right. And then right before we get started, if you don't mind, take a few seconds just to give us a thumbs up that you are here and you're liking what we're doing. And then subscribe to the GMAT Club channel so that you can continuously get updates on things that we're bringing to you and all sorts of news and insights. So, all right. So again, welcome everyone. I'm Jen T with a Ringo, and today we are going to be talking about winner and loser MBA resumes. So thank you for joining me. We have a live chat, so please take a second and tell us where you're from, where you're joining from, and then I can be answering those as we go through the presentation today. So if you have questions, it's here. If you have specific questions about your profile, your resume, anything like that, please feel free to reach out. My email address is on the screen and we'll show it again at the end. But excited to get to know you guys as we chat today. So we'll jump in. Before we get started on everything that we're talking about, let me tell you a little bit more about Aringo. So we're an MBA admissions consulting firm, and we have been around for 20 years. We were founded by a Wharton alum who believes in the team-based process. And so not only do we have you working one-on-one with a consultant that gets to know you best, but we also have a strategy team behind the scenes. We also have a writer that's going to review your application and an MBA school expert that's going to review your application before you get it submitted. And we'll also be helping you with the interview and potentially, if needed, waitlist assistance. So we help you with all things MBA and business master's degree related. So if you need anything, we're here to help. And we've helped over 4,000 people get accepted to top MBA programs across the globe. That's here in the US, where I'm from today, Atlanta, Georgia. And then also across the globe in the UK, Europe, Japan, China, Southeast Asia, Australia. Like, people, we have clients getting admitted to schools all over the globe. So if you're looking for an MBA, we're definitely here to help you with getting to that next step in your career. All right, so today we're going to be talking about crafting a winning resume. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what an MBA resume is or isn't. We'll talk about how to make an impactful resume, and then we'll give you some examples, 2 losers, 2 winners, and you guys will help me with kind of deciding what needed to be done better or what they did well. Then we'll go through a group exercise. So I have some segments of a resume that we can go through and kind of spot what's missing or what needs to be done. And then we'll have a quick recap and then open it up for Q&A for any questions that you might have related to MBA or business master's programs. All right, so we'll get started. And again, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel as we go through the process. All right, so an MBA resume is different from a job resume. There's a couple of things that typical job resume is looking for. Is kind of, they want to know what your responsibilities were. Well, when we look at it from an admissions committee perspective, they're more of looking about Yeah. You had responsibilities, but what did you do? What was the impact? What, how did you do things? How did you get things accomplished? Because really, they want to see what you can share when you're in the classroom with your cohort and what other people can learn from you and what you've done in a good way and in a bad way. So, obviously, on a job resume, you don't want to put any sort of failures. And I don't know if you necessarily want to put failures on a resume itself in general for the MBA, but MBA is definitely a space where you can talk about failures. So we can always tell a short story on the resume, kind of as your marketing tool. And then when you dive into the essays, tell a little bit more behind the scenes about what happened between those job transitions, maybe an exit from your own startup that maybe didn't work out. So again, a little bit more of a safe space because we want to know about what you have experienced and what you can share with your peers. So, okay. So the other thing that the admissions committee is going to be looking for is a bit more of that teamwork and collaboration skills. So they want to see how big of the teams you've worked on. So whether it's just a team of 5 or a team of 20 or 50, they want to know about that. But they also want to know, where were those people located, right? Like, were they international? Were they global? Were they sitting right next door in the next cubicle over? So giving them a little bit of context about, maybe you only worked on a team of 4, but each of you were representing a different country in this whole process. So there's a lot of context that you can give during your resume bullet points to really give them a better idea of what you have experienced and accomplished in your professional life. So I would say that the MBA resume is definitely key to being part of that next step in getting invited for interview. It's your introduction. And so you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So here's a little bit of a breakdown, right? So professionally, you want to be able to share how, you've been able to make an impact in your company or your segment or sector, function, whatever it might be, right? So showing them you're special. So you do this by giving them good company descriptions, right? So, if you work for an MNC or a major consulting firm or something like that, like a global brand, great. They probably know who they are and what they can accomplish, right? Like, so if you have PwC, EY, BCG, any of those kind of companies on your Procter & Gamble, if you have those on your resume, they kind of get the context or the reference point. But let's say that you worked for a small family office. They probably don't know much about that company, and they're not going to take the time to Google it or to go into LinkedIn and look at your profile and then connect to the company, et cetera. They don't have that kind of time or resources when they're doing this review. While it might be an electronic copy of it, not a paper copy anymore, they're not going to link off of their packet that they have to review. So you've got to give them context and say, work in a small family office of 5 people with a budget of X, Y, and Z, or clients across the globe, or something like that, right? So you want to give them more details so that they can see what you've done. Then we talk about the responsibilities. And then you want to be able to also kind of talk about any sort of like spot awards or any recognition you've had, and be able to kind of connect this to your goals. And you don't want to just tell them what your position was or copy the position description and put it into your resume. That kind of works for a job resume in a couple of ways, maybe, but it definitely doesn't work for an MBA resume. Also, I will say that this is not an opportunity to use ChatGPT to make an MBA resume, because it doesn't know what that is. And you can't just put in the qualities that an MBA is looking for and have it spit out what you have. So, you've got to put some work into those bullet points. And so we have an example here, right? Like, so what kind of details is a committee getting from a bullet point that says a lawyer dealing with real estate versus you're the head of the biggest law firm in the real estate department in Germany, leading a team of 4 responsible for projects ranging from $10 to $30 million, right? So a lot more impressive and gives them a lot more detail whenever you are putting that in there. And they can get that right off the bat from your resume, their first impression of you. So academics, this is another opportunity for you to dive in and share a little bit more about what's special about you. So, did you do any student exchanges? Did you have any specific projects? Sharing your CGPA or GPA, and putting it on the scale, right? So if it was, a 7.9 out of a 10, that's really great. They want to see that. And so that they know the scale and they can understand your GPA, you can put that there. And then we also usually ask people to share their class rank. So we have a lot of clients that come from India. And so when they're looking at what a CGPA is, admissions committees know that even the school topper is not going to have a 10 out of 10. That's just not something that happens there. Whereas maybe in the US, a lot of people might get a 4.0 or even higher than a 4.0. Who knows how that's possible? But, giving them the rank gives them context of like, I was in the top 2%, 5%, 10% of the class. And when we start to go down a little bit further from there, like anything over top 15%, maybe we don't need to include it as much. And then again, like any sort of honors and awards that you've had, and then any sort of leadership or volunteering that you've done. You want to definitely include that. The extracurriculars can definitely help with show a parallel between what kind of student you're going to be whenever you're in their school with what you were when you were in undergrad. And so they can make a parallel understanding of like, they're going to be involved. They're going to be taking part in the different clubs and activities and really be a student at our school. All right. So beyond that, again, I'll just emphasize that you want to talk about what kind of impacts you made. And this is quantification, right? So anything that you can relate to hours, percentage, dollars, days, anything like that, you want to be able to quantify it and give the picture to the committee so they can say, okay, I get an idea. If they say that they're working for a company with 200 employees and they had to reduce the head count by 10%, then I can understand, okay, now I know how many people they had to cut and how they were able to make that budget. Or you can even say like, was able to contribute to 10% of the revenue of the company. And if you say that it's like a, multi-million-dollar company, then they can say, like, okay, got it. Like now this person's really making an impact. All right, Big Mike. What about if a candidate has multiple jobs, more than 4? Will that be a deal breaker? Absolutely not at this point. So I will say in the past 5-ish years, especially after COVID, admissions committees are a lot more open to understanding what's happening behind the scenes. And so just because you've had 4 jobs, there's been changes in the different economies and different markets, and things were impacted in different ways. And, employment is a very important part of somebody's livelihood. So they understand that you might have had to take a position that didn't exactly keep going on this trajectory of where you wanted to be, but you had to take a job in between. So really what you need to do is obviously include it on your resume in a way that makes sense, but tell the story in an optional essay and say, hey, there were major layoffs in the tech sector, and I had to make a pivot to be able to, kind of survive over the next couple of years. And then I was able to make this huge move to where I wanted to be afterwards. Or that's why I need the MBA to make this move or pivot or, discovery that you've been going through. So, okay. So we've talked a little bit about what is important for your MBA resume to include. So now it's time for us. So I'll say we also need to tailor the role. And we can talk about this like a little bit more after we look at some examples. But this is kind of, again, you want to tailor your experiences to make sense to what you're sharing with the committee. So if you're saying that you want to go into marketing after you've been in product management, then you want to make sure that your resume is kind of slanting toward this, pivot of like, oh, I've had this experience and I've had a taste of it, like working with the marketing team. And it's something that excites me more than managing a product itself. And so I want to make this pivot. So you want to tailor your resume to make it make sense like that. Okay, before we jump into this resume, Rajat says how to highlight the contribution impact in a product development role, which does not include any quantifiable numbers like revenue or profit. Whew. So I think that there could be a way of talking about the time it took for the product to get, like how the length of time for development or anything to do with supply chain. So you can also talk about, the vendors that you had to work with, working with vendors from Germany and Spain to, deliver the product in England, right? Like, so if there's like a different type of international stuff, you can put that, like across multiple countries or across 2 countries or 2 continents. You can put that in there. You can also talk about budget. I think you kind of referenced that a little bit, but I think you do need to, if you don't talk about revenue or profit, you can talk about budget because that obviously goes into product development, or how many people were on the team, those types of things. And we can jump into that a little bit more too. So this here on the screen is our first loser resume. So this is a resume from a chartered accountant, and I will tell you, I see this a lot. I see this table come across all the time. And so while this might be a feasible resume for a job, it is not for an MBA admissions committee because you're showing them that you haven't taken the time to really convert this over to a professional resume for a post MBA kind of job search. Some other things that you'll see here is that the bullet points really aren't giving the committee anything to kind of go on, right? So I know that I did black out the name and redact it, or the company name, so you can't exactly see that. But like let's just say that it's an assistant manager at Procter and Gamble. So it talks about credit underwriting of NBFCs and the fintech startups. Well, how many? Like, we're missing a lot of details here, and we're really only giving responsibilities, not necessarily the full picture. The other thing is obviously like an internship is important, but a lot of the times we don't necessarily want to include an internship on a professional resume. I mean, I think that this person had quite a few things that needed to be explained a little bit in the optional essay, but as you can see, they're definitely not using the space or the real estate to share a picture for the admissions committee. When I see this, I automatically, my brain goes to, wow, they didn't put a lot of effort into, putting together an MBA resume for me. There's 1,000 examples, free examples. Even some schools offer resume templates and none of them look like this. And so, it makes me think, wow, you didn't research what an admissions committee is looking for. So how much effort did you put into your application? Even though the person probably put tons of time into this resume, it's the impression I get as an admissions committee member looking at their resume just at first glance. So the other thing I'll say is that you can see that they have class 10 and 12 on here, which I understand is also important, but it's not important to an MBA admissions committee. So an admissions committee, a few ways to look at this is that they're looking at the impact you've made from college and beyond. So if you accomplished anything during your undergrad, A lot of that relates back to academic performance. So that gives them the ability to assess whether you're ready for the rigorous curriculum and give them a parallel to draw from. But then also, what kind of leadership experience you have. So that's what we can take from college. Internships really aren't as important because they don't count towards post-graduation employment, which is what an MBA program is ranked on. They're ranked on how many years of post-graduation from your bachelor's degree, how many years of work experience you have. And so that's what's going to be most important to them. So showing internships during college might be a good reference point if you've only had one employer or two different roles, but they usually want to see, again, a lot more about what you've accomplished since you've graduated, especially on the professional side. A couple other things is, so when we look at an MBA application, you'll also see the online form will have a section for your technical skills certifications. So you don't actually have to take space from your resume to actually put that here. You could put it in the form and actually use this space to show them more about your leadership and your contribution at the different companies. Okay, so the other thing is, right, like, so you've told me a little bit about your extracurricular activities, but I didn't really get to, like, what's the point of telling me that you're a volunteer? What kind of volunteer were you with the National Service Scheme? Like, did you give 1 hour a week, 1 hour a semester, 10 hours a week? Tell me more about that. Why would it need to take up room on this resume if this is the one way you get to communicate with me in the first, 60 seconds of reviewing your application? Why is it important for me to know about your time as a volunteer at the National Service Scheme? Tell me why. Same thing with basketball. Were you a captain? Did you do this for multiple years on end? So building a rapport with your teammates, anything like that is going to be more helpful. So hobbies, tennis and athletics, interesting, but not amazing. I think that there's a lot more opportunity there. The other thing is that you'll see that they put their contact information at the end. I wanted to keep that on here so that you can kind of see that, this format isn't necessarily what an admissions committee is looking for. You want to do the traditional header with your name, contact information, etc. at the top, so that they can get the picture a lot faster of kind of, and you don't have to put your address, but more of like what, either country or state you're from, so that they get to kind of visualize what kind of economy you're working in, where you've been educated. Those types of things is going to be helpful for them to make a picture of who you are. All right. So next we'll go to the second loser resume. So we'll have Abhijit bring that up for me. All right, so this is another resume that was submitted and dinged at top MBA programs. All right, real quick, Ganesh has a question about our graphical formats with a photo of yourself taking over. Okay, good question. That's in my next slide. So after we get done with this, I have a couple of reference points for these beautiful marketing materials that some people have, and how it might be a little bit distracting or hard for an admissions committee member to find your information, but we will definitely talk about that next. Okay, so taking a look at this resume that's here on our screen. So if you look at this, it looks so simple, and that part is good, but it's missing so much. There's not a lot included in here to give the committee, a real picture of what this person has been doing since 2013, right? That's a lot of time, almost 10, well, I guess a little bit over 10 years. What have you been doing? I see 2 roles. And so if you were in those roles for a longer period of time, there should be some much longer bullet points to go along with that and the impact that you've made. So with that being said, diving into this really quickly, you'll see even just in this first bullet point, planning, monitoring, and control of the budget for different countries. And so like this doesn't necessarily make sense. It doesn't give a picture. Like, what does that mean? How many different country, or well, the country part is good, but like, what does that really mean? Control of budget for these countries. I don't understand what this really even means. So let's, kind of dive into it a little bit more. And these can have their own bullet points with a lot of rich data and quantification of what you're doing. Because if you're planning, monitoring, and controlling these, you probably have a lot of data to share with them about this experience. And so, more than responsibility, we want to talk about the impact that you've had in these different areas. So beyond that, accounts payable, invoice, these are just basic experiences that could be maybe even eliminated from the resume to give room for more impact from a different responsibility or experience that you've had with the company. So have you made improvements? Have you increased efficiencies, reduced the time for maybe not the process, but maybe the time for payment? Like how long, like instead of outstanding bills, how long did it take for, like, did you reduce the amount of time it took to get paid by a client or a vendor or anything like that? So, this resume doesn't give the bigger picture to the committee. And I'll be honest, this is worlds away from, where this client's resume ended up. And so, I think that, this doesn't do diligence for this person and really show what they've accomplished over the years. Okay, the other thing I wanted to do from this resume specifically is, looking at the grade here, knowing that Germany has a different grading scale. So making sure that they did do this really well as the final grade, and they put the equivalent, because if you took this at face value, a 1.8 does not sound like a great plan or a great accomplishment. And so they did do the equivalent there to make sure that it did bring the attention to the committee member who's reviewing this, that my GPA is actually quite outstanding. And you should, not take it as like a 1.3 out of a 4.0 or even a 10 scale. That would be even crazier. So making sure to give them some context is great. This is another opportunity where maybe even putting the ranking could be helpful for the admissions committee. And then community events, this is, peer review board is good, but, what impact did this have? Like how many publications or how many people were on the peer review board, and how many readers did it reach? Those types of things. Like what kind of impact did this community activity actually have? And languages are great, but there's another opportunity for you to also put those languages on the application form, so you don't have to use this based on your resume, which, obviously they had a lot of blank space to work with, so maybe it was okay for them. But somebody who has a very full resume probably shouldn't use that. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the presentation really quickly, and I'm going to show you a couple other examples of loser resumes that would definitely not be super helpful for an admissions committee. So I've redacted these and I've blurred them out because I didn't want to go through the whole process of making each one of them anonymous. But there is a way to kind of just look at these from a surface level and think about it as an admissions committee member. When I come to this page in your packet, here's what I'm seeing. So this first resume here on the left, wow, it's a lot. It overwhelms the person who's going to read this. And I don't know where to look first. And I don't even know what all of this is needed for and why there's columns and everything like that. So, I would say you don't want to overwhelm the committee member with too much information. That last resume was a little bit too little, but this is way too much. Yes, Max. Next is going to be the winners. Okay. So then in the middle one, so this is, Ganesh, kind of going back to what you were talking about with the graphics. So what I want to share here is that there's definitely some beautiful resume templates that people have been using. And so, they're great, but they're not going to tell enough information. I have people who have timelines like graphically shown on their resume of like where they were. And so this is, not extremely helpful for being able to use the space wisely and to be able to communicate with the admissions committee as well. So the graphically pleasing ones, yeah, it's beautiful, but how much are you able to even share, or what size font would you need to use to be able to communicate anything? And then lastly, we can look at the last one and say, okay, they're wasting so much space with having this left aligned subject. So, you want to be able to, you want to be able to make sure that the committee is getting as much information as they possibly can, but you also don't want to overwhelm them, but then also you don't want to waste all this space. So there we go. So those are some other quick examples of things to maybe avoid as far as like pitfalls when it comes to designing your resume. All right, so we're going to move on to the winner resumes. Woo! Okay, so get excited. So while Abhijit is loading that up for me, I want to say, remember to subscribe and like our YouTube channel and to give us a thumbs up here today. Okay, so this is, we call it the TikTok guy. So this person was admitted to LBS, INSEAD, and one of the M7s. So looking at their resume, you can see it's neatly aligned. It follows different sections that are going to be easy for somebody to follow along. This is an ideal format for an admissions committee member or a reviewer, right? So from a standpoint of, I can say, all right, great. The most important part for me is, what have you done professionally? So that's first. Then I can go through each one of your roles. Then afterwards, I can look at your education and be able to see, where you went to school, what you learned, your GPA, ranking, all that kind of stuff. Then I can see your community activities and additional information. So fantastic. This is easy for me to follow this flow. And this kind of goes in order of ranking of importance for the admissions committee. So this is something that I would follow, whether you decide to use an MBA template that somebody else has, like Oringo. I'm happy to share ours, or any other admissions committee firm, or either the schools also offer these resume templates too, so that you can see what's most important to them. INSEAD, MIT, I think Stanford. We have a list on our website too that I'm happy to share the link after we get done. So you can look at what formats that they like, but they're all pretty similar to this. So if we dive deeper, we look at the TikTok guy. So we can see that he was a program manager. You can see easily the dates that they were employed, but then let's dive into the first bullet point. Led business community planning, collaborating with 10 teams across product engineering and operations in US, Ireland, and Singapore to, oh my gosh, I can't read everything right now. To be able to work from home, for capabilities for work from home operations of 3,000 vendor workforce during COVID pandemic. So this is fantastic. So as we kind of said before in the loser one is that, they gave us what they were kind of in charge of doing, but they didn't give us anything else to really grasp onto. And so this bullet point, automatically says, I was in control of this whole process and I coordinated across 10 teams in these different countries. And here's what I was able to accomplish through this. So this was a fantastic bullet point to give the committee an idea of what impact they were able to have. So we can continue to look even closer at this by looking at the operations associate role, led projects to change the existing operations process and reducing operational spend by 500K. So this is another great opportunity to, again, show this impact that they've had. Then we kind of can keep going down under the second employer, the first bullet point as an associate, among top 5% of employees to be promoted to client leadership, working in the client liaison role in Singapore. So this is fantastic because another question that the admissions committee is going to have throughout the process is, how do you compare to your peers? How are you performing compared to the person with a similar title sitting next to you? And so this gives them this opportunity. Not everybody's going to have this relevant information, but if you were promoted faster than anybody else, then that could be a strong bullet point for you. So promoted within 12 months of hire, 10% or, 6 months faster than anyone else on my team, or youngest to be promoted to this role. Those types of things can be very helpful. So I wanted to also show that, whenever you look down at their education, looking at the BE, they were able to talk about, they won medals for the Department of Athletics and sports festivals. I maybe would have added what sports, just to add a little bit more character there. Class representative out of 80 students for the cultural festivals. So again, you're giving, I was 1 out of 80 to represent the entire class, so that they can, again, see the reach of what you were doing. You could even, and again, like, this is like nitpicking, but you could, talk about like what kind of budget you had to manage or anything like that, if you didn't have additional community activities that you wanted to be able to talk about. Okay, so other community opportunities. So if we go down to the third bullet point, volunteer of an NGO, nonprofit group aimed at improving welfare of underprivileged children, conducted educational sessions for children 8 to 10 years, financially supporting their education to debt. So the one thing I would also add to maybe this is, how many of those children did you have an impact on? So if you were able to find a way to say, like, worked closely with a group of 10 children or something like that, that could be helpful. Again, languages, if you have the line, you can definitely, if you have the line or the space to share it, then that's great. Other than that, playing football, represented the team in a corporate indoor football championship. So there's something about this, right? That you were part of a team that's from your actual company, gives the committee some idea about your ability to, one, juggle work-life balance, but then this is another extracurricular moment of, I was involved at work outside of my normal duties and was able to build rapport and work with other people, and could definitely be a fantastic tell me a time when answer later on in an interview. Okay, so, visiting 15 different countries is a really cool thing too, because if you have international experience, but maybe it's not professional, right? Like, so you don't work for an MNC, you work for a very specific regional company, you haven't had to travel or work professionally, but you do have international experience. You've traveled across different countries or continents. There's a way to put that on your resume, even though it's technically personal, to show this international exposure. And I would definitely highly recommend doing that in some way, form, or fashion. So we once had a guy who was a scuba diver. And so he was able to share that he had dove. Yep. So he had been scuba diving in multiple countries, at least, 15 different countries, which is a really cool way of combining, international travel and a hobby to be able to share that. some people are like, well, I really don't have anything spectacular to show. I'm a runner. I like to do marathons, but that's not a team event, etc. But if you told me you're a marathon runner, surface level, I can say, wow, a marathon runner I know needs to have the ability to plan, to build out like kind of a training program for building up to the marathon length. They have to be dedicated, committed, and they have to have a lot of endurance. So you could go through long sprints as well. So I'm going to draw those qualities from being a marathon runner to the fact of who you are and what you can do. And that shares a lot of different qualities about you. So it doesn't always have to be a team activity that you're sharing here. It can definitely even be those individual activities as well. All right. Adil has a question about if a resume is 2-pager to give a bit more brief details, is it okay or should it be a 1-pager? So ideally for a full-time MBA application, so you're going to a 2-year MBA program, you're going to have typically between 2 to 10 max years of experience for a 2-year MBA. Ideally, that should all fit in one resume, 1-page resume. If it doesn't, then you want to use the full 2nd page, because why even put a 2nd page if you're not going to use the whole thing? So you're wasting space because they're going to look at the page in general. So then you go full detail. But I would recommend sticking to 1 page. Some schools have a requirement of it has to be 1 page. So, kind of keep that in mind and look at the preferences of the schools. But I'm going to tell you for a 2-year MBA program, they're looking for a 1-pager unless there's extenuating circumstances. And then maybe it's even worth 1 line on an optional essay to say, you'll see that I have a 2-page resume, and this is because I had quite a lot, like quite a few transitions professionally, post-COVID or post, the tech layoffs or anything like that. So you want to explain why you're doing something that's an exception to the norm if you're going to do a 2-page resume for a 2-year MBA program. For a 1-year MBA program or executive MBA program, I think you could definitely lean into that 2-year or 2-page resume, but I wouldn't go beyond that. Okay, so Ganesh, is it true that colleges are scanning particular keywords in AI algorithms? I would say no. So for the most part, and for what I know of the industry, there is an individual that is sitting and reading your application first before it goes to any next step in the process, whether that's not exactly somebody on the actual direct admissions committee. Some schools hire readers to review them that are highly skilled in knowing what should or shouldn't make it to the interview stage. But from every admissions committee member that I've ever met or know at this point in time, they are using actual people to scan the actual application and not using AI tools. And I think that is them doing their due diligence of not wanting you to use AI to make sure that you don't use AI to make your application. They're not going to use a scanner to do that. And so as I'm explaining that, I think that your question may have been a little bit different from what I answered. So maybe you're asking if an MBA admissions team is using some sort of almost like a plagiarism tool to see if you are using AI in your application. And so they are. So there's a couple of companies that have come out with some, and I don't know how it works because that's definitely not my area of expertise, but there are definitely admissions committees on the graduate and undergraduate level using scanners for seeing if you've used AI to help generate and assist with your application. I think that a resume is incredibly hard. Like an MBA resume is going to be incredibly hard to create with AI. I've yet to see one that I loved or liked or thought that would pass through, but I'm sure that they're out there. But I think it's a really hard time to be able to make AI work for writing an MBA resume. Okay, so thanks, Ganesh. I'm glad I got it right the first time, but good point anyways, right? Okay, so next we'll have the next resume shown, the candidate that got admitted to Stanford and to MIT. So this resume here, again, kind of follows that same format of work experience. What did you do after you graduated? Goes into where they went to school and what they studied and their GPA, and then kind of that leadership and additional information. So if you kind of go through this, you'll be able to follow that same flow of order of importance for them. So when we look here, first, we'll see that they have a company description, right? Because this was a bank that they worked for. And so they were able to, give that description to give the reference for the admissions committee so that they understood who they worked for. And then from there, manage third-party consultants to deliver timely submissions of documentation required for launch of new system. So, I mean, honestly, that's not the most descriptive bullet point in ever, but I think it's still good to talk about third-party consultants. They could have even talked about how many people that was, but delivered a bank-wide loan program within 2 weeks. So quantifying what they've done and managed the end-to-end process, resulting in 5 new client relationships. So this again is perfect. So they quantified the time of 2 weeks, plus they said the result was, 5 new clients, which, could result in X dollars of revenue. If they had that at that point in time, they might not have had it. So received collaboration recognition for being the first employee to engage in records management office in new process. Fantastic. So they talked about an accomplishment, a recognition. And then if we kind of go down to education, then we can see again, GPA on a 4.0 scale, that cum laude, honors, all of this is definitely a great way to kind of get recognized. And then that they were a committee member for a specific activity. And then they talk about their volunteer experience and how they were able to work across the 5 different boroughs in New York and impact 600 families at each event. So fantastic. So, there's a couple of different things. So some of this has been changed for anonymity. So it was a specific community group. It wasn't just a generic heading of community group, but then Habitat for Humanity, another group that they were part of, languages, road traveling. So this is another interesting way of sharing different experiences, right? So a 3-week road trip across the US, visiting 15 states, a week trip across Cape Town, and then various Canadian trips, right? So, you're showing at least, 2 different continents, 3 different countries that you're sharing that with. And then they also share that their native language is French, which gives an idea of this person is maybe not born in the US. So, they're an international student potentially. So that's something else that you're giving to the admissions committee from this. So this is the winner, the last winner resume to share. So next, we'll transition back to our PowerPoint. And while we're there, so same tone says, for someone who only has 2 years of work experience, is there any chance to get into an MBA program? All right, so 2 years of work experience is the minimum, right? So most MBA programs will publish that they require 2 years or more. So when you submit your application, you should have that 2 years of work experience so that you have enough breadth and depth to be able to go into the foundational side of the MBA program. You have a point of reference for all the different classes, whether it's, finance, economics, marketing, supply chain, right? Like they want to say like, okay, so if you've had 2 years of professional experience, hopefully you have enough depth to have an understanding of what these different subject matters are, and you have a reference point to your previous employer. Now, if you've been sitting in a cubicle with no promotions over the 2 years, I would say it's going to be pretty tough. So if I were to say who could get into an MBA program, a top, M7, T10, T15 program, is going to be somebody who's had promotions and has worked across different business groups. So not somebody who's been siloed as maybe a software engineer working in one role with one client or a program or something like that, right? So it needs to be somebody who has had some career growth and exposure to different parts of the business. Happy to talk about that offline. If you have a very specific instance, we can always talk about that and dive into it as well. So, okay, so we went through loser and winner resumes. So now I was going to do a quick example so that you guys can help me with spotting the errors. So this is a quick resume for my boss, the owner of Oringo. His name is Shimri. And so he put this together. He does this. This is one of his favorite exercises. So yeah, so he's excited. Like he gets really excited about this. So he has his education here. Nothing I think we need to look at specifically. And then he is, well, so I think that he wanted to share, like, this is a good example of how you put your education section together, right? Like the school's name, what your degree was, the years you were there, the GPA, and your honors. And I think we kind of covered this a good bit with those other examples, but this is, a nice clear way to look at this as to what your education section could look like. If you're short on space, you can always add it to this one line, right? Like, so you can include your GPA, your honors here, as well as maybe even like Bank of America outstanding student, 2025, right? Like, yeah, there's also an award section in the application form itself. So you can also include more details there if you felt like you needed to. Okay, so here again is another opportunity to kind of look at what you want to put under a company heading. Again, like what the company is, what the company description, your role, time that you were there, and then an impactful statement. Led a team of 3 to develop a new recruitment strategy for Oringo, initiated outreach to non-traditional resources, overhauling website, social media, pre-screened CVs, obtained 30% more relevant candidates as a result, right? So this is an impactful statement that you can add to your resume. Okay, so I'm going to move on to here. So this is our kind of a little bit of a, let's see if you can spot the formatting issues. So go through here, look at it really quick and see if you can spot some of the issues. And then the next slide will highlight them. And while you do that look, I'm going to look at Big Mike's question. I did not have any promotions, but I switched jobs that allowed me to take on more responsibilities. Is that a deal breaker? No, that's fantastic. So I will say, for the most part, a job transition, like taking a job, either a new role at a company or starting work for a different company, should be seen as a promotion unless you specifically articulate that it was a lateral move. And I wouldn't recommend that. So if you have another entry on your resume, for the most part, they're going to take that as that was career progression. Whether the title reflects that or not, then, that's something to maybe share in your story or optional essay if you need to, but it's not a deal breaker at all. So Mike says, as a paralegal, the only way one can get promoted is by going to law school or working for over 10 years, and maybe a person can get a senior paralegal role. Perfect. Great example. There are absolutely some roles that you will not get promoted regardless of what it is. Or it takes another degree, or it takes a certain amount of time. We have a lot of folks that we work with that are coming from the consulting industry, and each firm has their own set of standards of you're not promoted to partner or like investment banking. Like there's definitely unspoken rules about the career progression and when you get moved to there. So I will say, for the most part, if it's a pretty mainstream role or company, that it, you know, a lot of people from that profession were in, like that role, they go and apply to MBA programs and attend them, then I would say it's probably something that's normal. They understand it. If you feel like it's a little bit outside of the normal scope of, you know, not the typical applicant, then maybe I would either find a way to incorporate that into your essays or your optional essay, or even into your letter of recommendation. And so your boss might not be able to say like, oh yes, so Mike was amazing and able to be promoted 3 times within the company. What they could say is, though, although we don't have promotions for paralegals, what we have done for Mike is recognize his outstanding abilities, or something like there's a way that your recommender can help you there by explaining it, or you can use the optional essay just to say, I want to call out to the admissions committee that, you know, within our firm, paralegals have only one designation. However, I've been recognized on multiple accounts for this type of award, or etc. All right, so everybody's had a chance to kind of look at this bad example. And so let's go over the formatting, because formatting is important for an admissions committee. If one of your bullet points says attention to detail, and then you present something like this, that's a problem. There's a mismatch in what you say and what you do. So obviously you want to make sure that you're using the same type of separator, your community experience and additional experience or additional information, different text, different formats, different boldness, and then alignments, right? Like, so that's another big thing is whenever a person looks at a piece of paper, they're looking for symmetry and alignment. And so if it's off, you start paying attention to those little errors and issues instead of reading the content itself. Now, grain of salt, right? For an admissions committee, they're going to say, all right, like somebody could have bad formatting, but it does kind of play into how much work did I put into this? If I'm telling you that I've dreamed of applying to Harvard since I was 5 years old, then you shouldn't submit a CV or a resume that looks like you threw it together yesterday. So, you know, it's kind of like making sure that what you do matches what you're saying on your resume or your application. I've had people that have put together an application in a matter of days or weeks because of a shift in a job, and they'll put that in the optional application, is that you'll notice that I'm applying in round 3, and that's because of a shift in, you know, my job or my sector, etc. Like kind of giving the committee a little bit of a hint of like, hey, like this was not something I was planning to do this year, but because of a shift, I'm doing it ahead of schedule and submitting my application because I think it's ideal to start this fall versus next fall. So, you know, if something were like that to happen, or if something like that were to happen, there's definitely ways to communicate it with the admissions committee. So maybe they give you a little bit more benefit of the doubt whenever it comes to that. All right. So again, a lot of this has to do with congruency. So if you're using, you know, USD format, then use USD format throughout the entire resume so that it makes sense and I can look at, you know, what you've been able to do over different markets and be able to compare them. And then you want to use the same type of abbreviation as well. You'll see here periods. So obviously, like when you're working in Word, it wants you to put a period at the end of every single sentence or phrase. And that's okay, but you need to do it for all of them, except for when it's a list. So, you know, just take note of, if I'm going to use periods, then I'm going to use periods. And if I'm not, then I'm not. Then make sure that you're doing it throughout the entire application, so it's not distracting to the people that are reviewing it. The other thing is that CV speak is different from typical writing. You can definitely use a lot more abbreviations. You don't have to follow the grammar rules of spelling out anything under the number 10 and anything over it using numbers. Again, whatever you decide to do, make sure you do it the same. I would say I would always use numbers over spelling out the number on a resume, because it's definitely going to be, we're looking at something with fast attention and they want to be able to see that. All right. So here again, another fantastic example of how to put in your community experience with different groups and being able to go over it. Obviously, there's a formatting issue here, but it's really not the big point. All right. So as a recap, I know we spent a lot of time together on resumes. So just a recap, here are the things that you do want to do. You want to keep it to 1 to 2 pages. 1 page is optimal. 2 pages, a little bit harder for a traditional 2-year full-time MBA program. Especially, and if you're applying to a specialized master's program, it really should only be 1 page. So yeah, there's that. Okay, so be sure it's easy to read. Again, like we want them to have that flow. Some of the graphical ones, like sometimes I will spend 5 minutes reviewing a resume before I talk to somebody. And then when I talk to them, I'm like, where did you go to college? I can't even find it. And they're like, oh, it's on the bottom right-hand side. And I'm like, I would have never even looked there. Like I didn't catch that in my first review, which is something the admissions committee will not do either. So make sure it's easy to read and follows a natural flow for them. The graphics are beautiful, but are they able to read and review them really quickly? Make sure that it works out there. So you want to quantify your impact. Again, any sort of numbers that you can share is important. You want to use verbs, and then you want to put your work experience before your education, because that is a lot more important than your education itself. And then you want to proofread. So things that you don't want to do. So there is an exception to this. INSEAD does ask for a picture, but typically, other than that, I wouldn't include your photo on there. You do not need to include your date of birth or your direct address. You can use the city and state, or city or state and country, depending on where you are, what makes most sense. But you don't have to give them your physical address on your resume. You can make it a little bit more generic, and you don't want to share your date of birth. You want to avoid cliches and jargon. So I've had many people send over resumes that I can't read because I have no idea what that means. If you want to think about the admissions committee as having an understanding a mile wide, but only an inch deep, right? So they know all the different professions that are out there and the different experiences you could have, but they only know this much about it. So make sure that you're not getting in too deep for somebody who's maybe not in the finance world, or somebody who isn't in healthcare, or I'm trying to think of IT is another one, where people can get really caught up in the different languages or programs and things like that. I mean, we know some surface level things, but not really in depth to be able to understand how you move one server to the next server. Is that really important to me? I don't know. Is it important to the admissions committee? Probably not, unless what kind of impact did it have on your business? So you don't want to lie or exaggerate. Again, we want to tell the truth, but you can always use your marketing slant on that, like what things meant. But think back to the fact that, one, if it's a common company, they're going to be able to have some reference point for that, or your recommendation letter needs to also reflect what you have in your resume as well. You don't want to get too creative. So if you're trying to have alliteration or different graphics or those types of things, it's kind of bring it back down to earth, because this person only has so much time to review your resume, and you want it to be easy, and you want it to be memorable, but easy. Don't share confidential information, and you don't need to go back to high school unless you started a business in high school. That's about the only time where you were Olympic athlete, right? Like if there was something like that, there are definitely some exceptions to the rule for it. But for 99% of people applying to MBA programs, high school is irrelevant. You don't need to include how you did in class 10 or class 12 on your MBA resume. They really want kind of college education, college extracurricular activities, and then professional experience. So that's kind of like the timeline of progression that they're looking for. All right. So that is everything I have to share about resumes today. I could share so much more. But ready for any questions that you guys might have. So as we wait for those to come in, I want to highlight again that if you're applying to an MBA program this fall, next fall, sometime soon, and you want to get more insights, please attend and register for the MBA Spotlight, June 11th and 12th. There's going to be a lot of amazing admissions committee members there that can give you firsthand experience and answer your questions. And just so you know, so that you're not scared or nervous, whatever you ask in these sessions or, your interactions, they don't go in a file that's permanent that gets reviewed whenever you submit your application. They may say, oh, so-and-so registered for an event or attended an event in their CRM, but they're not recording those interactions as long as they're all positive, nothing negative. So you don't have to feel bad about asking a stupid or a silly question. They're there to help you. And that's the great thing about the people that are going to be at the MBA Spotlight. They're really here to help. All right. So KTM, should part-time jobs such as retail, fast food after college be included on the resume? I would say no. This is a broad answer, unless maybe you were the manager, operations manager, or something like that, or you want to be in the restaurant or retail business later on. I would say don't include it. There's definitely a rhyme or reason for somebody to include it, but for the majority of people, I wouldn't include that stuff. You can just go ahead and kind of skip into your professional experience. And then if there's a gap, right? Because I have a lot of, this is the time period where people graduated during COVID or they graduated right before COVID, and, jobs and shifts in jobs or changes happened. And so that's okay too. But if there's a gap and let's say that there is a gap, like a year or two where you had to, kind of do those part-time jobs to get where you needed to be, that's okay. Again, use the optional essay to tell them why. So you'll notice there's a gap on my resume from graduation to my first role. During this time, I was applying, but the market wasn't there, or it was COVID, whatever. And so to make ends meet and to get experience, I worked at X, Y, and Z to be able to do that. And at that, I think that you can even say how it's a relevant learning experience of in this role, I was able to learn even more about supply chain, especially if we talked about fast food during COVID or retail, all these kind of things. I feel like there's a lot of really interesting reference points that you can bring up about, well, it wasn't my first choice. It is, it was a great learning time for me to learn about X, Y, and Z. So that's something else you can kind of share. All right. Any other questions? I feel like we're not as many are coming in right now. So please remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to GMAT Club. Ganesh, thanks for doing this. Oh, you're sweet. I love helping people with their MBA applications, and would be happy to help you guys as well. So you'll notice here that my, I'm going to grab my link for a calendar, but you'll notice my email address is here. So you guys are more than welcome to email me if you have any questions specifically about your profile, but you are also welcome to schedule a session with me. We offer free profile evaluations to GMAT Club members. So I will have the link shared with you so you guys can schedule a time to meet with me. And if it doesn't come up in the chat, I think Abhijit can share it for me on the backside. But if it doesn't, I'll put it in the YouTube link as well. But happy to meet with you, talk about your profile and your goals and how you position everything on your resume, as well as, you know, on the other parts of your application. Oh, thanks for sharing that. So that's my link. You guys can click that and schedule a time to meet and go over your profile. All right. Any other questions while we're here? We'll probably stay here for just a few more minutes unless something else comes up. Is anybody applying for MBA programs this fall? I hope so, if you're here today, but applications are starting to come out. It's so exciting. So I think so far what I've seen is Columbia, Yale, and Haas. I think those might be the 3 that were published as of yesterday. Ganesh, I'm so excited. So, you know, they're starting to kind of roll out. And so, you know, get excited about this time. It is going to be a lot of work to submit an MBA application, a lot of retrospect on your life thus far and where you want to go. And you're going to have to be vulnerable. But in the end, it's going to be worth it to be able to get to that MBA experience where you're going to get to grow and go to that next chapter in your life. All right. So I think we've answered all the questions. So really have enjoyed my time with you today. I appreciate you guys sticking around and hanging out during the presentation. But any questions, please let me know. I'm here to help and excited to answer your questions. Ganesh, you have one more. Should you do anything different about your title recalibrations across company mergers on your resume? Ooh, that's a lot, but you can. A couple of different ways that you can reference that is either the new title or a slash, or, it just depends. But there's definitely a way to, I would go with the title that's best and then go from there. But yes, and we can talk about that offline too, because it really is situational, but happy to answer that question. All right, everyone. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you for MBA Spotlight soon. Bye.